Hi, Judy.
Lisa, how's your day?
Good. Pickle and I are ready for today's podcast. Pickle is
Pickle is
absolutely
always ready for
thrilled
the
here.
podcast.
So if you're watching this, you can see Pickle is joining us. You can also see
Hey,
that I have a black eye. So
I
just
see
put
that.
that
Yeah.
out right here at the beginning. It is getting worse rather than better. I was
Hmm.
walking the dogs and they pulled me into a post. And
Nice.
And that first day, I just put a Band-Aid on this and called it a day. It was great. But subsequently, every day when I wake up, I have got more and more purple above and beside my eye. So
Does that
anyway,
mean that purple eyeshadow is what's the
I
color of the
guess it's the
day?
going thing these days. I don't know if it's if it's the one eye with the shadow is on trend, but
Well,
that's what I'm rocking today.
when you turn your head that way a little bit, you don't see the back one as much. I love it. That's funny. Only you would run into a post.
I ran into a post. Yeah. So the
Run into
moral
a
of the
post.
story is when you've got dogs that are interested in critters, don't go walking with them attached firmly to a belt.
Oh, that's right. You walk them with a
Yeah.
belt, so you can't really drop a leash or anything.
No, exactly. So
No.
that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Um,
Okay.
so anyway, today we are talking about telling the truth in our writing.
Yes.
Some people really have a struggle with this because, it's one thing to tell the truth in a diary or a journal that you're not going to be sharing with people.
Right.
You can let it all hang out and be your,
Okay.
down and dirty self. But when you know that somebody else is going to be seeing this or reading this, and maybe judging you on what they're reading. I think sometimes people want to fluff and want to make themselves look a little bit better or
And
are afraid to really be truthful when they're writing. And maybe that would even stop people from writing in the first place because they have something that they want to share, but it's not flattering.
you're talking about embellishing and making it better than it was and that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
if we look at the purpose of legacy writing, we want the folks that are going to read this, our people, to know who we are,
Yeah.
not who we think we should be or not
Hmm.
who we might have liked to be, but who we are. And that goes with, the mistakes and the successes and all of those things.
The warts and pimples of everyday life.
Yeah. And that being said, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to say it in a way that, okay, what's the word? Let me pick the right word. It doesn't have to be brutal or crude, or you can pick your words in such a way that it comes across with don't beat yourself up over it. That we're not asking for that, but tell the truth in a way that it's understood, and at the same time that it's not completely and totally awfully negative. You know what I mean? This isn't to say, Judy, you're a horrible person. This is to say, this is what I chose to do, and this is
This is
how
who
it
I was at
happened.
that
And
time. Hmm.
yeah, this is like it's a snapshot in time, is exactly what it is. And that is not to say that that's who you are today, right?
Oh, definitely. The other thing I think is, when you share some of the not only the good, but the bad, the ugly, and the questionable, I think that it adds a real depth and a real life and a real vibrancy to our writing. It
Mm-hmm.
adds a point that people can really connect with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if it's all fluff and happy and wonderful, that's not real life.
Yeah,
As I
that
told
writer's
Aubrey one day, every family has got their shit. This just happens to be our shit, but it doesn't matter how wonderful a family looks on the outside. Everybody's got their stuff that they've got to
mm-hmm.
deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And what you get, you don't get to choose. You just get that stuff, and that's what you need to live and develop and work through.
It's kind of like a card game. There are There are times when you play cards and you're dealt, oh my gosh, these cards are amazing. Whoa, I'm going to win this hand. And then there are times when you think, who dealt these cards to me? But you still
I
have
don't
to
have a
play.
chance. Mhm,
Right. You have to play the cards, and you play the cards you're dealt.
mhm.
Is it fair? Not always. Is it what you want? Not always.
Yeah.
Can you make it work for you? Most every time. And can you just fold them and say, okay, I'm not gonna go with these right now.
Mhm.
You have options, but to leave those out of the story or out of the writing or out of the legacy tells people, oh, she only had good things happen for her.
Mm, mhm.
And how come I have all of these hurtful things and issues to deal with? And I just watched a half an hour preacher on television, and he was talking about the four valleys that we all go through. And the first one was physical, and the second one was financial, and the third one was relationships,
Okay.
and then the fourth one was spiritual. So, when you're
Mhm.
in that valley and you just don't know how, you don't know what to do, you don't know how you're going to deal with it, that's the time to turn to, if you have a faith in a being or whatever, but just know that there are ways out of that.
Mm.
And by writing about it, you give other people hope that there are
Now,
ways.
I think that there's a caveat to that. You don't necessarily want to write about it as you're going through it.
Right. Oh,
Currently,
definitely.
I think what we're talking about is in legacy writing, you want to write about the experience that you've had. This isn't a cathartic experience that you're looking for the world to be your therapist
No,
or to
not at
help you
all.
solve a problem, but it's to say, this is where I was at this point in time. This is the beginning. This is what happened. And this is, ultimately what happened. I'm thinking to myself, I mean, it's not a heavy duty example, but when we had the topic of our first bike,
Mhm.
everybody was writing about, oh, a tandem bike and, riding with my sister and, the rusty old bike that you got your first bike. I wrote about a bike accident and it was called My Broken Vajayjay.
Mhm.
And, it was something that, oh my goodness, when I went through that, I mean, I was only probably 12 or 13 or 14 when it happened. But would I have written about it back then? No way
Probably
on
not.
God's green earth. It would have been way too personal and way too, um, you know, close to my heart. But now it's like, yeah,
Now
I
it's
mean,
laughable.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, you
exactly.
you don't you maybe didn't read my whole writing. I talked about my tandem bike and all the fun Sandy and I had with
Yeah.
it, but I also wrote about screaming home at night when it was getting dark and running into the back end of Mr. Fairhead's boat. So I had an accident in my
That's
writing
right.
as well. And the boat went flying out into the street, and everybody in the neighborhood came running, and my poor bike was a little bent up. The boat was
Yeah.
fine. But it's true. And now, oh, it's hysterical. At the time, it wasn't very funny. It was
No, no.
yeah.
So I think, looking on at hindsight on some of our experiences, that kind of brings me to another thought is, when you talk about something that's real and maybe doesn't put you in the best light, I think it adds a real juiciness to the writing where people are looking for a realness and an authenticity
Hmm.
that in movies they put that in there because it's interesting. When we're
Hmm.
writing our legacy writing, we put it in there because that's the stuff that lessons are made of. That those
Exactly.
are the experiences that have made us who we are. And if we don't share the unflattering or the hard or the difficult experiences, you're really not getting the real depth of who we are as a person or as people.
Well, and you're not showing yourself as being real. You're not
Mhm.
showing yourself as being human. You're just showing yourself as being this idyllic people, I think about the Christmas letters I get sometimes, and everybody's children are wonderful and they're doing this college and they've had these babies and they're the prettiest babies ever in the world. And,
Yeah.
you kind of read through it and you go, oh, here we go again.
Everything's positive, 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 positive. And it's just like it makes you want to gag, puke, and barf. Yes.
Well, exactly. And we're not saying you should be totally down and dejected in your writing, even in a Christmas letter. I mean, something that wasn't your favorite thing happened this year, right? It's something. I'm sure of it, because I think it happens for everyone within any 365-day period. But, I think sometimes putting that in makes you relatable, relatable. You want to, and I think if it's our family down the road, it's going to let people know that, hey, great grandma wasn't perfect either. And she had issues in her day. And thank goodness for sharing them, because it makes me feel a little better about the dumb thing I did.
I totally agree. So what do you want to say? I know that before we started this recording, you were talking a little bit about poetic license. Where do you think that fits in with legacy writing? And when do you think it's appropriate and when is it not appropriate?
I think if it's embellishing, I don't think it's appropriate. If it's making you seem better than you were, I don't think it's appropriate. But I think sometimes you can take poetic license, which just means I think of it as kind of clean it up or make it a little easier to read, or, whatever. You can take a series of 10 events that all applied, and you can pick 3 bullet points and focus on those instead of having
so just saying you can consolidate a number of events into 3 events.
Exactly.
For the purposes of your writing.
Right. So that you're not making it so complex and so difficult to read and
so long and drawn out.
And confusing. You can just hit the high points, I guess. And to me, that is poetic license. I know every once in a while, our family, because we all know each other so well, will say, well, wait a minute, that was about this. I mean, I was doing a writing the other day with our group, and we were talking about the men going to the cottage ahead of us, right? And I said they went to open up the cottage. And Sandy said, no, they went to go fly fishing. Well, they might have been going fly fishing, but they were also going to open up the cottage. And I didn't need to go into all of those things. You know what I mean? So I picked and I chose. And to me, they added readability, and I hit the high points. I guess to me, that's what poetic license is. And sometimes it's simply, I had my own personal reflection that I want to write. And it may not be the way anybody else saw it, but me, but it is truthful because it's my personal recollection.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay.
The other thing I was thinking in terms of poetic license was, let's say you want to flesh out an experience, or, there was a conversation happening between you and a neighbor. Let's use that example. I don't maybe necessarily remember verbatim what I said and what that neighbor said, but I want to really give the flavor of that conversation. So I will make up, so to speak, the words. I'll put words in that person's mouth that give that same feeling to what
you get the gist of it. You make the impression. You let the person be there and hear what the interchange was without remembering.
And that may not be exactly what they said, but it's close enough for government work. Yes.
Exactly. That is a great example of poetic license. Is, especially like right now, we're often writing about things that happened 30 years ago.
Or more. Yeah.
Do I remember a conversation perfectly from 30 years ago? No. But I will remember, the way I felt and the way the interchange, the way things basically felt. And it doesn't hurt if it's not putting words in the person's mouth. It's using poetic license to tell the story as truthfully as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings me up to another question. I wonder, we talk about sharing our stories and our experiences, the life that we've lived on paper, recording that for posterity's sake, to be able to connect and share lessons and thoughts with another person. And when I talk about lessons, there was somebody that I recently interviewed on the podcast. And when I do interview people, I pretty much always have either read their whole book, if they're a memoirist, or I've read most of their book. And, I found them to be really interesting. And this particular person, their story took up the first half of the book. And then there was like the second half of the book, they kind of broke down what they learned and what they thought and what they felt. And I thought, I really liked the first half of the book. I could have done away with the second half of the book, though. What do you think about, adding more like analysis to your writing than just story? What place do you think that has?
Well, speaking from absolute firsthand experience, I am an overthinker and I overthink everything. And I can understand perhaps feeling like, well, I put it out there and it's very honest, and
And maybe didn't put you in the best light.
Right. And so therefore I need to add, well, how did I grow from that experience? And what did I learn from that experience?
Yeah,
and then that's going to make it okay.
Yes.
Well, I really have grown in my wisdom and maturity to believe that I think we should leave that to the reader. I think, if you want to make a point or two, but not half of the book, kind of thing. I think that's, in my opinion, it's number one, it's a little boring. And number two, I think it makes that person that's reading it say, hey, I understand. I can figure it out. I know what lessons would be there for me. And, they can make their own decisions about it.
I think the lessons can really be inferred through the experience that's shared. And the lesson I get from an experience might not be the same lesson that you get from an experience that I'm sharing.
I think most of the time that's true. That's true. I think that's so true, because the life you've led and the life that the person reading has led are two different lives. And I think we all have our filters that we put on the things that we read, and we respond in our minds to things that are presented to us by the life that we have lived.
Exactly.
And if you who loves dogs got bit by a dog, oh well, you got bit by a dog. If you had to have stitches, you had stitches. Someone who's terrified of dogs could get bit by the same dog and suffer from PTSD and have trauma and could never want to see a dog ever again. Those are two different impressions.
Well, and I think you could perhaps share, maybe if your lesson from your exact story that you just shared right there about getting bit by a dog, you could perhaps continue in a storytelling vein, telling about, instead of saying, even though I got bit by a dog, I'm not afraid of dogs. Telling the lesson in a black and white form is boring, as you said before, but going on to share maybe another experience with another dog where people would assume that you would experience that PTSD, I think is a better way to share the lesson than to just flat out say it.
I think you can get more attention from your reader, and you can make your point more clearly by sharing an experience than by letting them suffer through explanation.
Yeah. Oh, excellent way to put it. Yes. Yeah. Suffer through explanation. And don't we do that enough?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not teaching my life 101 here. I'm,
Yeah. And I mean, really for us, we are the storytelling part of legacy writing is really the fun part. It's really the part that we enjoy doing. And I think it's the part that people, our friends, our family, our communities, people in the future will enjoy reading.
I agree.
Not being preached at, not being taught, but being shared with, but that connection that we are building.
Exactly. And let them do with it what feels right for them.
And also, don't you find that, when we're rehashing those things that we've been through, we re-experience and come up with new truths
Mhm.
in our later years than we would have ever come up with when that experience actually happened.
Because
So,
we have more to base it on. We have
yeah,
more experience to add to that experience to give us the total experience. I think that's
yeah,
true.
yeah,
Yeah, I would
exactly.
agree with that, definitely.
So,
But I just say, I really, 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 really encourage our readers, our writers, to be truthful. Don't be. Oh, one other area I was thinking of is sometimes people will not write about something that happened because they're afraid that someone with whom that happened will recognize the writing. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but I think it's worth repeating that there's nothing wrong with changing the name or changing the location or something of that nature in order to not
incriminate.
incriminate, embarrass, or brutalize that other person.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, changing some of the details to be able to make it your story, because you're not telling somebody else's story or somebody else's version. You're telling your story. And by changing a few of those details doesn't change the lesson, the experience for you. It keeps it in your world. That's really important and I think valuable. Mhm.
I always bring up that reminds me when I was a kid of watching Dragnet, and they'd always start at the beginning by saying, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And I think that's okay. That's good.
And
I
I would go on to say that we change the names to protect the innocent and the guilty, perhaps.
yeah, well put. I think that's true. Oh,
Well,
funny.
Judy, this has been so wonderful today again.
I
I
know.
love we're talking with you about these topics. It just seems like, we're just synergistic and going back and forth and kind of hashing out our thoughts on them. And we'll get together again next week, and the topic is going to be storytelling. I can't wait for that one. That is
That'll be
like
fun.
my thing, and
We'll have to
it's going
bring
to be a fun
Matthew
one.
Dix's book along when we do that
Oh,
one.
that's a great idea. Yes,
Yeah.
I interviewed him on the podcast last year on his book called Someday is Today. I think that's what it's called.
Tomorrow is today. Something like that. In
Okay,
other words, in the future is really today.
do it now.
Okay.
But he
Do it
also
now.
has another wonderful book called Story Worth,
Storyworth. That
Storyworthy,
was and
Storyworthy. And yeah, so I've read that one a couple of times, and it's a real touchstone for me. So we're not going
I
to be interviewing him again, but we're going to talk about our viewpoints and our thoughts and our recommendations, our suggestions for telling a good story.
sounds great. I look
Beautiful.
forward to it as
Okay.
always.
Love you,
Okay.
Judy.
Love you
Talk to
too,
you later.
honey.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.